Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Greetings of peace and welcome to this series of Catholic-Shi'a Dialogues hosted by the Ansari Institute for Global Engagement with Religion, part of the Keough School of Global Affairs at the University of Notre Dame. I'm Mahan Mirza, Executive Director of the Ansari Institute, which is dedicated to studying, learning from, and collaborating with religious communities worldwide in order to advance integral human development, a holistic model of human flourishing articulated in Catholic social teaching and resonant in multiple religious, humanistic, and philosophical traditions. Our comprehensive approach to the demands of human dignity, in turn, demands engaging with and learning from various disciplines, sectors, faith communities, and in a deliberate way with all people of goodwill. A core value of the Ansari Institute is narrative empathy, defined as the sharing of feeling and perspective taking induced by reading, viewing, hearing, or imagining narratives of another's situation and condition. The Institute invites immersive engagement with the variety of religious and cultural worlds that humans inhabit. It is this mission that brings us together today in a time of great turmoil, under the shadow of war and the threat of even greater war. Some consider this period as a kind of inevitable clash of civilizations. Great thinkers and leaders, like the United Kingdom's Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, suggest instead a framework of dignity of difference. And after 9/11, Iran's President Mohammad Khatami suggested a dialogue among civilizations. Our gathering is a response, in many ways, a response to pursue these alternatives. I'm grateful to Azra Banafsheh Keinoush for proposing the idea of these Catholic-Shi'a dialogues, and to Professor Gabriel Reynolds for partnering with her in their implementation. Let me introduce each of them in brief, and then we can commence this first dialogue, which is really a dialogue about dialogues. How do we talk about having a dialogue, and what do we mean by civilizations? Dr. Azra Banafsheh Keinoush is at the University of Notre Dame, and she's a scholar in residence at the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies. She's also an affiliated faculty with the Ansari Institute for Global Engagement with Religion. She's the author, co-author, and editor of 4 recently published books, including Saudi Arabia and Iran, Friends or Foes, and the very recently published Abraham Accords, National Security, Regional Order, and Popular Representation. Her latest project is a forthcoming book chapter that focuses on critical discourse analysis of the Iranian Shia influence in the Middle East. Previously, she was an interpreter at a Catholic-Shi'a Dialogue Series event that convened in Europe from 2008 until 2019. She was also, if I may add, the voice of President Khatami, translating his speech of Dialogue Among Civilizations at the United Nations into English. And Professor Gabriel Said Reynolds completed his PhD at Yale University in Islamic Studies. He is the author of the Quran and its biblical subtext, The Emergence of Islam, the translator of Abdul Jabbar's Critique of Christian Origins, and editor of the Quran in its historical context. And also he edited New Perspectives on the Quran and its Historical Context, Part 2. These are from Routledge, BYU Press, Fortress Press, and also he has several publications with Yale University Press, including The Quran and the Bible, and Allah, God in the Quran. He runs a very popular YouTube channel exploring the Quran and the Bible that features conversations on scripture with leading scholars. And he's an endowed professor in the theology department at the University of Notre Dame. So I'm deeply grateful to both of you for leading these dialogues, and I'll turn it over to Banafsheh to commence. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Dr. Mirza. Thank you all for joining us today. It's an honor and a privilege to be a part of this community of conversationalists on this day to be able to take this idea forward under the umbrella of the Kiosk School and with the support of the Ansari Institute. I'm very honored to be able to partner with Dr. Gabriel Reynolds at the University of Notre Dame. And please allow me to introduce our scholars from the Shia world. With us today, we have Dr. Mohammad Hossein Mozaffari from the University of Religions and Denominations in Qom in Iran. And he was a founding director of the Center for Peace and Dialogue. He is a scholar of Shia theology. And we also have the honor to have with us today from Iran, Dr. Said Javad Miri. And he is with us from the Institute for Humanities and Cultural Studies from Tehran, Iran. Welcome both, and thank you very much for accepting our invitation. I would like to now pass the floor to my colleague, Dr. Gabriel Reynolds.
Thank you so much, Banafshe. I'm really grateful, likewise, to have this opportunity to collaborate. Special thanks go to Dr. Mohan Mirza, director of the Ansari Institute, and to the community in the Kio School and the Ansari Institute. Our audience and our collaborators in the session may know that Notre Dame is a Catholic university dedicated to the pursuit of truth, using both faith and reason, but it's not closed in within itself, only looking internally at the Catholic tradition, but is a home to welcome others from other traditions. And so, in a way, Notre Dame is every day a place of dialogue, of civilization, and also interreligious dialogue. I'm part of a program in the theology department that our two Catholic guests both know very well, which is the World Religions, World Church section of the department, which its very purpose is to engage with Christianity and the church around the world, but also with non-Christian religions. So this is wonderful to be gathered in this context in which we have a very special sort of dialogue in two traditions, which I think there's a lot of points of contact and opportunities for conversation in Shiism and Catholicism. So let me introduce, friends, our two Catholic speakers. First, Dr. Rocio Cortez Rodriguez from the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, which is in Santiago, I think, capital of Chile. She is an alumna of our program, World Religions, World Church, where she did a PhD focusing on the theory and method of dialogue, but in particular, the tradition of scriptural reasoning. So thinking through scriptures together, one's own scripture and other scriptures. And she has been a pioneer in bringing that method of dialogue to Latin America. She's now an assistant professor at the Pontifical University in the Department of Theology. And then Dr. Eric de Villiers also did his PhD in World Religions, World Church here at the University of Notre Dame. Before then, he was at Yale University, where he studied in the Department of Religious Studies. He wrote a brilliant dissertation on the question of seeing God, and his dissertation, in a sense, is a sort of dialogue because he begins with the question of what Muslims call the ru'ya, what Christians often call the beatific vision, so the vision of God. He begins with both Jewish and Christian dialogue around that question, can God be seen? And then he turns to the Quran and then later Islamic theological tradition, including not only Ash'aris and Mu'tazila, but also the Ithna Ashariya or the Imami Shia tradition. So he's currently a postdoc at Notre Dame and has been teaching courses for us and researching on a number of different projects this year at Notre Dame. So thank you both for being here, and I'll turn things over back to Banafshe unless you tell me to proceed right to question one, Banafshe.
Please do, Dr. Reynolds. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. So friends, I'm going to start with just an open question, and I'll address it first to our Shiite scholars and academics. So to Dr. Mustafari and Dr. Sayed Miri.
Dr. Miri, please.
Okay, we'll start with Dr. Miri first. And Khosh Ahmadid, very nice to be with you. I didn't mention that in my presentation that among other things I love about Iran are Iranian movies. My wife and I just watched one last night, but we're not here to speak about movies. I'll be turning to the question of civilization. So could you introduce us to, from your tradition, from a Shiite view, whether philosophical or theological, what is understood by civilizational dialogue? Can we start with that general question? And we'll start with Dr. Miri, please.
First of all, I'm very happy to be here and thank you for inviting me for this wonderful dialogue. Well, as all of you may know, and I'm sure you know, that the concept of civilization itself is a very modern concept. So if you are going to ask what is the perspective of Shia or Shiism on civilization, so in a way we have to problematize this question a little bit. Say, for example, 1,000 years ago when Sheikh Mufid was talking about, for example, Shiism or about his belief, certainly the concept he had in his mind, it was not civilization, but it was maybe the word taifa or the fi'ah. It's like, you know, clan or maybe tribe. So when we are talking about what is the position of Shia clerics or Shia theologians or even Shia thinkers about civilization, in a way we are asking a modern question. In a way we are trying to say, what is the position of Shia thinkers in what we may call it modern Umwelt or modern life or modern context of life. So in this sense, I think there are maybe different positions. We have, for example, maybe people who are living in the Shiite world, somehow in terms of, in relation to modernity, they are trying to have the position of negation, that whatever is happening is not good thing or it is negative. So say maybe the others, for example, they are trying to say, I'm giving you one very tangible example. There was an Iranian called Sayyid Hassan Taqizadeh. He was himself a cleric and he went to the seminary, but slowly he moved on and he said the only way we can live in the modern in the contemporary and modern situation is that we have to modernize everything, even our understanding of religion, our understanding of mazhab, our understanding of Shiism and everything. But later on in his life, he started to revise his understanding by saying that maybe that was too extreme. Maybe it's better if we have a position of reconciliation, trying to find a middle way. Then there are maybe others who are trying to, in a sense, not modernize the religion or religionize modernity. They try to say, for example, religion has its own conceptual framework, and modernity and modern life and modern philosophies and modern metaphysics has its own paradigm. So we have to try to learn the language of these two different paradigms. So when you ask me about what is the position of Shia thinkers or Shia theologians, I think it's not very easy to say there is only one single answer or one single position. We are faced with multiple paradigms and multiple forms of encountering the other. So maybe your question is about maybe at a general level, how, for example, Shia thinkers think about the other. Should we, how should we conceptualize the other? And in itself, I think this itself is a modern question or a modern challenge. Maybe, for example, 500 years ago, 600 years ago, we didn't have this question. Maybe it was easier to encounter. For example, the concept of Ibn Sabil in Quran, for example, how to encounter Ibn Sabil. So this is the first thing it comes to my mind.
Thank you very much, Dr. Miri. And maybe I'll add just a word and then invite Dr. Mustafari to add any thoughts. One thing that I've begun to learn about the religious formation of scholars in Iran is that there is an interest generally in philosophy, but that is not restricted to philosophers from the Shia or even Islamic philosophers. There's an engagement with, for example, hermeneutics, and scholarship in analytic philosophy in Europe. I don't know if you want to address that at all, this sort of openness within the religious formation of scholars in Iran to other
you're
traditions.
right. For example, as you mentioned, here we have, for example, in Iran, surely professors who are very religious, and they practicing Muslims, as we say in English, but then what they call, for example, themselves Heideggerians. They follow Heidegger. And we have, for example, others who are really practicing Muslims and Shias, but they consider themselves in terms of their philosophical position, they are analytical. So, or maybe some even, for example, I remember when I was in Malaysia a few years ago, there was a seminar, and one of the students who was studying philosophy abroad, and he was for a short time, he has come back to KL. Then he was telling, what we need in Malaysia is we have to establish philosophical schools here. And others were like, somehow they are trying to like confront him. And I was wondering, wow, even you go to Qom, in the seminary in Qom, everybody's talking about philosophy. Recently, for example, the Grand Ayatollah, his name is Ayatollah Jawadi Amoli, he was saying, if you want to talk about Messiah or Mahdawiya, and you don't know Heidegger, you don't know Kant, you don't know Descartes, then your understanding of Mahdawiya is not really complete. And I was thinking, okay, when we are talking about Muslim world, some may think, for example, it's very monolithic. But I think we have very, very diverse understanding and different understandings about this question of the relation between philosophy, religion, and how we understand the interaction between them. I'm trying to say, yes, you're right. There are these phenomena too.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Dr. Mustafari.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor Gabriel, Dr. Mirza, and Dr. Banafshe. I highly appreciate your efforts for this series of dialogue between Catholic and Shia scholars. I say salam also to my colleague, Dr. Miri from Tehran. Since I'm in Qatar now, I left my conference hall to participate in our meeting. The conference is on religious freedom, from religious freedom to religious responsibility, which is not just going on in Doha, Qatar. I follow in line with the problem that raised by Dr. Miri, that over generalization of the matter of civilization is problematic, because the concept of civilization is a contentious concept. First of all, we have to consider that the notion of civilizational dialogue just emerged after the appearance of an article, a paper by Huntington in Foreign Affairs. And interest and civilizational dialogue was a response to the clash of civilizations. It means that it's not a theory, or it's not a well-versed concept. Just it's a reaction to the concept of clash of civilization. It means they wanted to claim that instead, rather than thinking of the clash of civilization or to prevent the clash of civilizations, it's better to establish bridges, to understand each other, to have dialogue, to prevent clashes and conflicts. This is one point that we have to take into consideration to better understand the question that raised by Dr. Kianosh, Then we have the next point is, as commented by Dr. Miri, there is no central authority in Shia theology like Vatican. I remember once the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the United States telephoned his counterpart, one of his counterparts in Europe, and asked, what is the Europe telephone number? I want to ask her position on this issue. It means that on that time, they didn't have one single position on political or other issues. And in the Islamic world also, and in the Shia theology, there is no central authority to have one official declaration to understand what is the concept of civilization in Shia understanding. There are varieties of views and variety of multiple interpretation, not only from a concept, a modern concept like civilization, but also to interpret the text, the religious texts, the religious manuscripts. Moreover, I want to challenge also this concept of dialogue of civilization. It means in the modern time, we have several master keys for social problems, for political problems, to have a master key. Yes, civilizational dialogue, clash of civilizations, or secular religion construct, and many other dualism and dichotomies that oversimplifies the problem, the social problems, the theological problems, the political problems. The social problems and international issues are not so simple to say, yes, we have several civilizations, Western civilization, Islamic civilization, Chinese, Japanese, Russians, Africans, and so on. We don't have such simple master keys for international issues. Even the Western civilizations, it's not monolithic. If yesterday I heard from the security conference in Europe, the speaker announced that we had our civilization, our Western civilization was based on common values, but today we don't have common values. Even in political issues, in some important and critical issues, they don't have an identical position. Even in European countries, each state and each political personality has his own or her own position. Therefore, the concept of Western civilization or the concept of Islamic civilization is a contentious concept, and I think we have to challenge this idea. If we want to establish bridges and to remove walls between our divides, there are many other alternatives for us, to intercultural dialogue, interreligious dialogue, even Catholic-Shi'a dialogues. That works much better. That's civilizational dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Mustafari. And that gives us a challenge that will, I think, animate our discussions. The very principle of civilization and its relationship maybe to culture. I'll turn now to Dr. Cortez Rodriguez and Rocio, if you permit me. You're welcome to speak about the general question, how do you and how does your tradition understand civilizational dialogue? But maybe also you could share your story as a Catholic theologian who's engaged with Judaism, Islam, and indigenous traditions in South America. And you've trained between Europe, Notre Dame in the United States, and now as a professor in Chile. If you'd like to address also the internal diversity in your formation as a Catholic theologian in different cultures, please.
Thank you so much for inviting me today. When I saw the first email circulating about this idea of dialoguing Catholics and Shia Muslims, I was really happy to see how this kind of dialogue help us to show diversity, internal diversity that our traditions have. So I was anyway going to attend, but now that you gave me the chance to speak, then I will take it to hopefully help to the dialogue. So thank you also for the question. It's difficult to think about the context I have been moving throughout these years, being in Europe and then in the US and now back in Chile, but also having an ecumenical family, right? Where my family-in-law it's Lutheran, and my family or myself is Catholic. So it's a very nice interaction, but also it helps me to see how it's something that you already mentioned, but as in the Muslim world, there is no monolithic tradition. In Christian world is not the same as well. Not even in Christian Catholic branch of Christianity. So it's different to be a Catholic here in Latin America than being in the US or being in Africa or in India. While we have the core of our tradition as universal, we definitely have experiences that mix with the cultures where Christianity is experienced. So we have rooms to have certain additions to the liturgy, to the rituals, to the celebrations, while in the South we are, I don't know, very Virgin Mary focused. In the North or in other places, it might not be an issue. I mean, it's part of the celebrations of the year, but they're not as important as they are in other places. And while in some places the celebrations are going to be more established or maybe organized, in other places music will play an important role. So while we have a church that claims to be universal, because we have our structure and we are linked to the Vatican, we do have also the internal diversity, not only because of the context, but also because of the congregations and movements that are within the Catholic Church. So if we start like doing the exercise of seeing diversity, then we will see how important it is to start showing it to others and somehow destroy the idea of Catholics are like that, evangelicals are like this, or Muslims are like that, because there are different ways of experiencing the same tradition. So moving into the idea of civilization, I just want to say one word related to that. I have been thinking about what the church or what we as Catholics may think about civilization, and it has to do with the theological idea of the kingdom of God. That kingdom that is dreamed, so this is a universal dream, an aspiration and our hope, but that is not accomplished. So is what we call the now but not yet. The kingdom is now, happening now, but it's going to be accomplished in the future. So having that in mind, the kingdom of God follows the idea of the gospel, of the teachings of Jesus, which is the main character of our tradition, and it has to do with the common good. And the common good understood as good health, good education. That's why the church has, throughout the centuries, involved in education, in the service of the health system, and for good or for bad, mostly for good, the church has been involved in those areas, also in terms of hospitality, in terms of taking care of the poor as well. That's something very critical in Latin American theology. And if you see the development of my country, for instance, in Chile, there are many centuries where education is only given by the church. And with all that, what it may imply, there were processes of going into a more lay system. However, until these days, there are still schools and university as mine attached to the church. So having the idea of kingdom of God brings us to the idea of the common good, and the common good understood as looking at the poor, looking at who needs our support, and not necessarily you have to move into other contexts, but you can also practice that with your close neighbor. And that implies also dialogue with others. But we will go into that, I guess, in throughout the conversation we are having now. Thank you. I leave some words to Eric as well.
Thank you so much, Rocio, for those beautiful reflections. You've left us with maybe some themes to continue to reflect on the kingdom of God. And, it's in Islamic tradition, there are maybe different ways of expressing a similar concept than now, but not yet, what we're working towards as believers, as people of God. Also, the theme of the common good. In Islam, there's the idea of the intentions of the Sharia, and I think especially in Imami Shia theology, the notion of something like maslaha, what's good for people becomes important. And then a third theme of hospitality, which is very important. And I think common to Chile and Iran, hospitality is very, very important. Maybe, the food is different, but hospitality is important. And then, Eric, if I can turn to you for our last reflection on this theme, and then I'll turn things over to Banafsheh to lead us through the second theme or second topic. And you could speak, of course, on civilizational dialogue, but I wonder if you could introduce from a Catholic perspective, as both Dr. Miri and Dr. Mustafari explained within Shiism, civilization is a new concept. As Dr. Mustafari said, in some ways, we're speaking about dialogue of civilizations in response to Samuel Huntington's article and then President Khatami's introduction of the idea. So, religions are engaging with what's happening sort of down below from cultures, ideas, or maybe some academic writing an article. Within Catholic tradition, there's two ideas that go together. One is that there is what Catholics call the deposit of faith. So we have received from God teachings about both his nature and his will for the world. These are supernatural revelations, which we're called on to reflect on, understand better. But they're given by God, and so they're in a way timeless and eternal. But also in Catholicism, you have the idea of God continually guiding the church. And so the church has the role of addressing, rearticulating Catholic teaching in new places. So maybe if you want to address that topic as well, please, Eric.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. It's an honor to be here and to converse with all of you. And I think that's a great starting point, Gabriel. I agree with Dr. Miri that civilization is a rather more modern concept, and I think it's therefore unsurprising that the first real Catholic attempts to sort of ask the question or give an answer to the question of what is Catholic civilization or what is the role of the church in fostering civilization comes during the Reformation period, when a unified Christian Europe begins to fall apart, and this move to either differentiate or reconcile with Protestant theologians comes to the fore. And we have thinkers such as Francisco Suarez, who for a time was perhaps the most famous Christian theologian within the tradition, more famous than Thomas Aquinas even, begins to formulate, as you said, Gabriel, and as Rocio mentioned, yes, a bottom-up movement, that culture arises quite naturally from human communities that organically form, and they form to pursue the common good. But there is also a top-down movement, which is supernatural revelation, right? The supernatural end to which human communities can be oriented. And that is, I think, in many ways, what we mean by civilization within the Catholic tradition, a society or a polity that fosters and coordinates a diversity of communities in their pursuit of the common good, but also attempts as best as it can to orient them or encourage them to pursue the supernatural ends that are revealed to them within the church. And so the church plays an active role in informing, either through the preservation of traditions or the fostering of certain cultural expressions that disclose supernatural truths, or through the teaching of doctrine in any way that is most effective given a cultural circumstance. These kinds of things that are, I would not say superfluous, but additional to what one might get by, humans left to their own devices. And so this is what we would call the deposit of faith within the Catholic Church, the body of teachings that the Church must guard, preserve, and teach effectively. And so this does, for Suarez and for the tradition down to our current Pope Francis, right, give us a certain question of how does one teach the deposit of faith effectively and fully across a diversity of traditions. And this, I think, is what is exciting and perhaps difficult and requires a great amount of honesty in Catholic and Shia dialogue, is because it first asks us to acknowledge, yes, that, even within the Catholic view, there can be a diversity of communities with a diversity of ideas and expressions, but united amongst the common good. So do we agree on what the common good is? And then second, the question or the dynamic has always been on this second part, how far can we go also in fostering a civilization or partnerships that encourage and provide incentive for us to pursue these supernatural ends? And how many of these supernatural ends do we agree upon and can work towards, right? And so I think that's where theology comes to the fore. And we do ask ourselves not only what is, the common good of man, but the common supernatural good of man. And that's, how we define our civilizations. And that there can be plenty of diversity, cultural or political, within those pursuits. But we would have to converse with ourselves on, to what end does that diversity serve, right?
Thank you so much, Eric. I'll turn things over to Banafsheh.
Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you very much, everyone, for this very interesting, remarkably illuminating conversation, which takes us to the next level of the debates that we'd like to bring to the fore. It's a question that I've always pondered on about our faith's apocalyptic views. And as a political scientist, and I often have to reflect on this question when I study the Middle East. In your opinion, Dr. Miri, Dr. Mozaffari, can you tell us how Shia apocalyptic would undermine the concept of a dialogue altogether? And of course, there are other faiths that also share with us Shia's apocalyptic views. Where does that take us? Is dialogue even worth it? And I'd like to combine this with question number 2 of this dialogue series, which is my responsibility to ask, which is that you did mention that perhaps it makes sense to speak about a Catholic dialogue more than it makes sense to talk about a civilizational dialogue, at least at this stage where the concept of a civilization is still kind of embryonic in the faiths. Well, then in that case, what can a Catholic-Shia dialogue address as a priority? Please.
It's a very, very interesting and challenging question. Interesting in the sense that if we look at this question from, internally and try to focus on the person of Messiah, maybe we start just arguing and trying to create more controversies. But when we look at the idea of Messiah and the apocalyptic scenario that both maybe in Shiism and in Christianity, in Catholicism, or maybe in other religions as well, as far as I understand, is the idea of Mahdi in Shiism is trying to depict a world where in that world humanity comes to its fullness For example, it reminds me about the hadith. It says something like that, if I am correct, that humanity up to the point that Mahdi has arrived, maybe if we consider knowledge 100 parts, up to that moment, humanity has reached only 2 parts of the entire realm of knowledge. But when Mahdi comes, the knowledge or the capacity of reaching knowledge will come to its 100%. So it seems what we are now suffering is the realm or maybe the hegemony of ignorance. And Mahdi or Messiah is the point that humanity can self-actualize itself. So if we take Messiah and Mahdi or the apocalyptical era in this sense, so I think different faiths, traditions, or different religions according to the Shia point of departure will reach to a point that humanity at large will have the position to self-actualize itself. But then, of course, I am not naive, and I am sure all of you know about these as well. So there are maybe, what we may call it vulgar interpretations of Messiah and like apocalyptic scenarios, which are now maybe even at work, both in Muslim world and in Jewish world, in Christian world. They try to interpret the coming of Messiah as a point where different faiths try to revenge, or they try to like annihilate the other. These are there as well, and we should not be naive, and especially when these ideas come into politics or in the political arena, it becomes like a tool in order to like try to sacrosanct the political repression. These are there as well. So I think it depends on when we are faced with, for example, religious tradition or religious canons. I think the question of interpretation and those worldviews we are holding and what we think of humanity at large and what we think of the other and the others and the universe and the existence, human existence. These are very, very important questions, especially when it comes to our assumptions, or as Jeffrey C. Alexander, the American sociologist, tells us, the background assumptions. What kind of assumptions we have? And with these background assumptions, how we approach religious canons. It doesn't matter, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, or any other religions for that matter.
Thank you very much for your in-depth contemplation of this very challenging question. We all realize how challenging it is and how critical it has become in terms of conflict analysis in the world today that we all face. Dr. Mozaffari, may I forward the same question to you, please? And if you have additional reflections of what the role of a Catholic-Shia dialogue can therefore be, mindful of what Dr. Miri just said, the possible vulgarization of apocalyptic views as well. What do you think? I think we may have Dr. Mozaffari. Are you there with us? We can't hear you.
He's
Yes,
muted.
I think if you just unmute Dr. Mozaffari.
Yes. Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Loud
Yes.
and clear. We hear you loud and clear.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you. I think both the confrontation of civilization or the clash of civilizations, and also the apocalyptic politics or apocalyptic notions can be used as an instrument for political agendas. We have our task here to liberate both notions, both apocalyptic idea and the inter-civilizational in a dialogue from a political agenda, and make it a religious, a theological debate. Apocalyptic notion is not only a concept of Shia theology. It's in fact a utopian idea which is present in every society, utopia. Even in ancient Greek philosophy, we have the idea of utopia. We have in Christianity the city of God. In philosophy, in today's discussion concerning the ecology and environment, we have the notion of utopia. Therefore, if apocalyptic idea or notion is positively interpreted and discussed, it will be a notion that will serve peace and coexistence. I read a verse of the Holy Quran. It's in Surah An-Nahl, verse 113, 112. وَضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثَلًا قَرْيَةً كَانَتْ آمِنَةً مُطْمَئِنَّةً يَأْتِيهَا رِزْقُهَا رَغَدًا مِنْ كُلِّ مَكَانٍ. It says, and Allah present an example, a city which was safe and secure, its provision coming to it in abundance from every location. Therefore, the utopian city or the utopian world is described in two or three traits. First, security and the abundance or the welfare of the society without any distinction to race, color, or religion. This interpretation of the apocalyptic idea serves the humanity, serves the world, peace and coexistence. From this point, we can also shift and move to the next question. Our discussion has the task to define meticulously the idea of interfaith dialogue, Catholic-Shi'a dialogue, and to liberate the dialogue from political agendas to make it a purely theological discussion, to purely dialogue between religious institutions to serve the society, to serve the people, The dialogue between Shia and Catholic cannot solve the problem of the world, cannot solve the whole problem that we have, political problems, security problems, and social problems. We have to start from very small points. If we start, that will be the result of our dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mozaffari. Could I forward the same question to our Catholic scholars, Rocio and then Eric? What are your thoughts on this?
Thank you for the question, and because it allows us to somehow go into our theologies, but at the same time to go into our hopes. And so I really, we have in the Catholic tradition a term that started to be very common in the 70s called the signs of the times, which means that we have the task, responsibility of read, understand, see, listen the signs of the time. The signs of the times are those challenges, are those signs that are moving the world into certain questions, certain issues. They can be political, they can be social, they can be ecological, they can be of different ways of understanding the challenges that the church in this case has to face. To be attentive to those signs of the times bring us back to the idea of the kingdom of God being something that can be experienced now, but not yet. And hopefully everyone will be capable or will be a person who is experiencing this kingdom of God. That was a question that brought Latin American theologians in the past that thought about how a continent that claimed to be Christian and mostly Christian Catholic was at the same time the poorest area in the world. So when we think about poverty, we are not thinking only about material poverty, but also social, in terms of political issues, like in the past we had many dictatorships in the area, so that was the main focus of reflection. But then throughout the years, the focus on poverty has been changing into indigenous communities, how fragile they are, indigenous communities, women, religious diversity, gender diversity, and we have also ecological issues, as what the Pope Francis addressed in Laudato Si. But there are different ways of understanding what Eric said beautifully, the common good. It's true that we do not have one specific idea of what is the common good, but we have to be attentive to what we call as the signs of the times. In terms of dialogue, since the Vatican II in 1965, the Church understood dialogue as an important sign of the times. So we need to dialogue. We need to understand each other, and that's something that Pope Francis has developed very much during his years as a pope, and he has a special sensitivity to interreligious and ecumenical dialogue, understood as a way to promote peace. So it's not only that we dialogue because we want to be friends, which would be, I mean, an addition and something good to add. And actually, David Ford, a Christian scholar in Cambridge University, he says that interreligious friendships are the closest way to understand heaven. So hopefully that would be something additional that is very good. But in terms of Pope Francis, he understands dialogue as a condition for developing peace. And dialogue in terms of knowing each other, learning, understanding, and coexisting, which will be the basic way of dealing with each other, but hopefully dialogue and even more interest by others, and also educating yourself. So Pope Francis called us to educate ourselves in our tradition. So we have to be able to share our beliefs to others that do not understand. And that's the beauty of dialogue, because it somehow pushes you to make our faith, our hopes, shareable, understandable to others. Because if we are among us, I mean, I'm all the time with Catholics and so on, if I say salvation, maybe I think that the other understands the same. But it's different when someone else asks me, what do you understand about salvation? And then I have to communicate it. So it's a double exercise. It's not that you only listen and learn from others, which is one important task or goal in dialogue, but it has also an exercise too that affects us as individuals, as believers, that we have to be able to communicate our faith. And I want to just mention it in terms of Catholic-Shi'a dialogue. I think that we have to, or we have the possibilities of emphasizing commonalities, but also finding the beauties of our differences. And that's something that in dialogue, I think is very important, not only to find what is common, and we may have many common characters in our traditions, events in our tradition, practices that may relate, but then there are also differences that may nourish our personal experience as believers. And in that way, and I'm only mentioning it to be able to enjoy together our scriptures, the beauty of our scriptures, what we as believers have in our core, have in our, because religion affects all our lives, since the beginning till the end of the day. So what moves us? What are the teachings of our scriptures that may help us to make it as a better world together? So, okay, Eric, the floor is yours. Sorry. I hope I left something to you.
It's a pleasure, Lucia. It's a pleasure. Thank you. No, thank you, Dr. Miri, Dr. Mustafari, and Rocio for all of your insightful comments. I mean, where to begin? I second wholeheartedly, Dr. Rocio's point about apocalypse being in many ways a source of hope, and that I think it's actually a great advantage and not a demerit of both Catholicism and Shiism, that there is a robust kind of sense of apocalyptic doctrine or eschatological doctrine, right? Teaching an emphasis on the last things, right? Final judgment, heaven. Why? Because I think both the Catholic and the Shia traditions have a deep sense with this apocalyptic, kind of mode of thinking that, one, this world is not our own. This is not our permanent place of residence, so to speak. And to attempt to answer one of Nuri's questions in the chat, this shows up in Catholic doctrine in what we would call the universal destination of goods. The idea that the doctrine of creation with Adam and Eve, at least from the biblical perspective, is that the world was created for all. But this is not our world, that the world is not Eden. And that because of this, I think both Catholics and Shia have a robust an internalized awareness that injustice occurs, and at times there is no clear sense that the good guy wins, so to speak. We may think about the examples of Christ on the cross, or we might think about Hussein and the idea that good people do suffer and what to do with that and where to then place one's hope for the restoration or the fulfillment of justice, and that this can only be in the place or the destination that is truly our home, and that is not actually earth. And that these kinds of thoughts or these kinds of beliefs, I think to kind of converse with Dr. Mustafari, can have political ramifications. For example, this idea that the world was intended to be for all and to the benefit of all tempers perhaps more absolutizing material ideologies in politics, ones that would either insist that, say, private property is a right that must be respected at all times in all places, no matter what damage it causes to society, or the inverse, that private property cannot be allowed, but rather the community and its decisions must take hold over and against any kind of infringement upon the dignity and liberty of the individual person. But to orient these all into a kind of apocalyptic or eschatological framework, I think helps us to steer that middle ground, and that Catholics and Shia are uniquely suited to do that. But I do take Dr. Miri's point very seriously, that there is a way in which apocalypticism can and has been vulgarized, to use that term, which is a very good one, to support a kind of political violence or an over-enthusiasm for what we might say of like taking justice into one's own hands. And again, I think this is where drawing upon our traditions both yields a way forward and also questions of real difference between our traditions. And what I mean by this is, for example, again, at least within the Catholic tradition, this sense that the crucifixion of Christ is a humiliating event, and it's not meant to be anything more than that from one vantage point. But paradoxically, it is at least depicted within the Gospel of Matthew as a miniature apocalypse. It is at this moment when Christ is most glorified, because it is when he is at his most selfless in suffering for others. And so too with Peter accepting his place in Rome, though he will be killed, but not fighting back. The martyrs, and their testimony. Likewise, within the Shia tradition, I don't want to speak for our Shia friends, but there is a sense, perhaps you would say, that Hussein is never seen at his most virtuous than when he does actually take to the field and is prepared to be killed for the sake of justice. And so in this moment, there is kind of an apocalyptic event, or like an exposition to the world of what justice really looks like in the face of immense suffering and tragedy and perhaps humiliation. And this is carried through within the tradition, at least as I read it, in the imams like Jafar as-Sadiq, who preach a kind of, what is called, at least in the West, quietism. That these are people well grounded, say, in a longer sense of history and time, right? That see kind of the end goal, the reward of heaven, as kind of what we strive towards. And it doesn't produce a kind of an over-enthusiasm for revenge or a taking into our own hands, kind of a righting of wrongs that we see, so to speak, but rather a kind of patience. Now, again, I mentioned there are some differences that this kind of meditation has brought up in my mind. And I think one of them that I'll just put out there in case anyone would like to pick it up is the idea of, like, can one suffer for another in Catholic theology or Shia theology, right? Is, say, Hussein's death exemplary only, or does it have certain merit or nefa, so to speak, benefit for all believers in the Shia doctrine? As, say, in Catholicism, there is this idea maybe of suffering and for another, or praying for another in a way that gives a kind of merit or strength that is shared amongst the community of believers. I hope that makes sense, but that's where I see kind of apocalyptic doctrine being a real strength for our conversation.
Thank you very much. It makes perfect sense, and I'm only gasping for air in order to be able to consume all the fabulous information that I've received from all four of you. That is why I'm also very ready to pass the floor on to Gabriel to ask him to please ask our third question, mindful of the time. We unfortunately have very limited time before we end this session, maybe around 10, maybe we can extend it to about 15 minutes. And we have, luckily, two last questions that interconnect. So if you don't mind asking the third question, I just request our speakers to please keep the conversation brief so that perhaps we can squeeze in a little bit of time for a final reflection and a few words by Dr. Mirza, and that would be great. Please.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Banafshe. Thank you to all of our participants. This indeed will be the lightning round. I think some panelists have to go right in the Eastern time zone, Eastern part of the United States would be 10:30 a.m. So that's 10 minutes. So if you could speak very, very briefly, you might want to add a thought or two, especially Dr. Miri or Dr. Muzaffari, on what Rocio and Eric have said. But the third question asks you, to look forward towards the present day and beyond, and especially to the globalization of these two traditions. Both are increasingly global traditions. Some people associate Shiism only with Iran, but of course there are Shia communities on all of the continents. Traditionally large communities in Iraq and many other countries in the Middle East, Pakistan, Afghanistan, but also today in Europe, in Australia, throughout the world. Catholicism also is becoming a church increasingly of the global south as it grows in places like Africa and declines in places like Europe. So that's the invitation for the third question. So please, maybe just 1 to 2 minutes only, if I can beg you for that, and apologize also. So Dr. Miri.
Okay, what is the specific question? I didn't get your question.
There's an invitation to respond to Eric or Rocio, and then the question is, looking forward, how does the globalized nature of Shiism and Catholicism affect or change dialogue?
Okay. What actually Eric and Rocio told, it gave an idea, just to add maybe 1 or 2 sentences, that I think we should distinguish between the language of religions and the language of capital. I think most of us, when we are talking about humanity within branches of religion, the language, or maybe the main concept of religions, is the idea of benevolence, faith. But when we are talking about the paradigm of capitalism, the language or the main concept is utility. So I think between a Catholic and a Shia, in a sense or in principle, there is no really fundamental differences. But I think what may create or generate antagonism between, for example, maybe a Christian and a Muslim, is the way they are living in a context, in the capitalist context, where these issues of utility and interest may put them in front of each other. Then maybe we color it with religion, with tradition, and things like that. This is a question I think we should ponder upon. But as for the future and the globalized condition of ours, this is a good question, I think. This is a very, very interesting and important question. I think we should think about religion or our traditions as a repository of hope, and try to focus on the concept of hope and how we can, in the condition of hopelessness, hope for self-actualization, and try to reach the other and try to decrease the pain and sufferings of the others. Why? Because we as humans, when we reach out to the other, it's not we are just helping them, but we are creating a sense for our conscience, for our soul, to soothe our pains and our shortcomings as well. So I think every situation in the world where there is a chance to reach to other, I think based on all religions, they are all the time talking and trying and insisting on the concept of service. We should take the concept of service very seriously and try to reach to others. And now that the globalized condition has created different ways of, maybe 50 years ago, even this seminar was not possible, 20 years ago. Now that we can actually see each other and travel very easily here and there. So I think these positions and these conditions, we should be conscious and all conscious and self-conscious that these are the act of divinity that tries to prepare a new milieu that humanity at large can interact with each other. So we should use these and employ these opportunities. Sorry, finish.
Thank you so much, Dr. Miri. Dr. Muzaffari.
Thank you. To be short, I think we, while the political agendas intend to make grand theories to employ religious doctrines, whether Christian doctrine or Islamic doctrines, for their political agenda, we have to move from particular to general, from small things. If we succeed, we have to define a task to liberate our doctrines for the service of humanity. This is one task that we can do. And the generality of West and East, or Christian civilization, Islamic Muslim civilization, is where was a myth and is a myth today as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Muzaffari. Dr. Cortez Rodriguez.
Thank you. Thank you also for the comments. Yes, of course, we have to go deeper into the terms that we use, and it's always tricky when you speak. Of course, we are all not all, but many of us are speaking in the second language, and yeah. So okay, just to be short, I would like to address how the teachings about interreligious dialogue in the Catholic Church are universal since Vatican II, especially with the document Nostra Aetate. However, we have a process of reception of the text. And that means that the teachings of the church go into the local churches. And that means that each country, each local church has to be able to read what the church is saying, but according to their context. In that way, I would say that in South America, we have the disadvantage of not seeing the diversity that we have. So for many years, it was not a problem or it was not an issue for theologians or pastors, priests, and communities. So only in the 90s, when happened what some authors call as the emergence of indigenous communities in South America, then we started to see indigenous communities as part of the diversity of the countries in this area. So the same happened with other religious minorities, among them Shia communities. We have in Chile Sunni and Shia communities. However, they are still a minority. So I am part of a national association of interreligious dialogue called ADIR. And one of the main goals of this association is exactly to visualize, to show the country that we are not only Christians and we are not only Catholics. So there are more communities, Jewish communities, and also the indigenous peoples are part of the country. So if we think about the challenges, yes, we have challenges, but also we can look at the experiences of other places, such as India, for instance, that they develop it much about interreligious dialogue because the context helped them to think about that maybe earlier than what we are doing. So we are in that way into
Thank
more
you so
dialogue.
much.
So thank you.
Thank you so much, Rocio. Eric.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I'll try to keep it as short and sweet as possible. I mean, I would say, right, the world is rapidly globalizing, and history is not destined, right? Where Catholicism and Shia Islam have gone is not necessarily where they are now, nor where they will be in the future. But what is important, at least to my mind, is to emphasize that in a way, and we've had this in our own conversation here, there is always going to be a third conversation partner in our discussions, and that is the modern secular world. And so because of that, I think what is primarily important as Shia Islam continues to globalize, as Catholicism begins to sort of sink its roots deeper into the global South, is that Catholicism and Shia Islam really embrace the tradition of their texts and personages and history as real distinct identities that are not kind of washed away in, kind of what could become, to put it vulgarly, like a secular kind of book club, what have you. But to be real alternatives, both as a way of life and as a way of thinking, and that can be we could be mutually supportive in that endeavor, right? To be authentically ourselves through this kind of embrace not only of our own history, but a commitment to understand that the other truly is different and has a history worthwhile in engaging, right? And that this is never made more clear than when we step outside of our dialogue and we see kind of the world that steps, to the beat of a different rhythm, so to speak. And that the more we kind of offer that alternative, the more that we, commit to helping each other foster, again, our vision not only of the common good, but of the supernatural good, the more we achieve our objective together, which is, a transcendent one.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Eric. Banafshe.
Well, thank you, everyone. In the interest of time, I think that we should wrap the session up because, frankly, our last question was kind of addressed by Rocio about the importance of how Catholicism can shed light on the importance of understanding Islam better and Shia Sunni world better. Perhaps we can leave that for later conversation. I invite you to join us in our geopolitical dialogue series in the future, in the very near future, and I hope you'll participate in that. But I would like to just thank everyone very much for this very conversation, and all our guests for accepting our invitation, and invite Dr. Reynolds and also Dr. Mirza to say a few final words.
My only final words are thank you. Thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to our next time together.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all. This was extremely interesting and important. I'll just say very, very briefly, because time is of the essence, that our purpose to gather here is one that's in some sense academic and analytical, but it's also humanistic. When I introduced this session, I spoke of the shadow of war, and that is real. And we need to be able to build bridges and put human faces to the people we characterize as demons and enemies across different sides. And so this is an important step, I think, toward that end. The problematization of the idea of civilization, the internal hybridity and complexity was articulated very beautifully. We couldn't get to all the questions, and I thank the audience that's here that posed questions, particularly Sayyid Masood Nouri, and he picked up this verse on, we have made you into nations and tribes that you may know one another. So the Quran has a category, or it gives categories of peoples and tribes, and so there's some analytic there of groupings across which dialogue should take place. And the verse has typically been read for universal human dignity, that across these groupings, the most noble is the most pious. But nonetheless, there are these groupings. And so we must talk to each other. And the next dialogues will be on geopolitics and on gender. So they'll be both more focused on particular issues. And we welcome all of you back, whether in the panel or in the audience, to those dialogues that are coming up. Thank you all. Most grateful. God bless you.
Thank you.
Shukran. Thank you.
Shukran.
It was a pleasure.
Really
to meet
well
all of
known.
you.
Have a nice day.